Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into something that's honestly a bit of a cosmic mystery. We're going to unravel exactly why perfect communication and understanding are fundamentally impossible. It's a fascinating, almost detective-like exploration into the very nature of how information travels from point A to point B, and why it absolutely never arrives exactly the way it was sent. Have you ever just wondered why, no matter how carefully you word an email or how precisely a machine transmits a signal, something always seems to get lost in translation? We always want to blame human error, right? Like, we say it's just bad psychology or terrible listening skills when wires get crossed. But what if I told you the real culprit is actually a matter of physics and mathematics? What if the universe is literally hardwired to misunderstand? All right, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit the perfect communication illusion, the formula of uncertainty, the topography of space, and then wrap it all up with subjectivity without a mind. Let's get right into it. Starting off with Section 1, the perfect communication illusion and the hidden limits of every single message. You know, we live with this constant illusion that if a message is just clear enough, it can be transmitted flawlessly. We assume data is just data. But a groundbreaking theory totally shatters that idea. And the key piece of evidence in our little detective story today is Marcello Di Massimo's information conjecture. He formalized this back on February 17, 2021. This isn't just some abstract idea. It's a profound mathematical argument that redefines how we understand the very limits of knowledge itself. Which brings us to Section 2, the formula of uncertainty. Let's break down the math. Okay, first things first, we've got to define our terms. These are the building blocks for this whole theory. So we have I, and that stands for absolute information. Think of this as the complete, totally perfect intended meaning of a message. Then we have IC, which stands for contingent information. That's just the evident known theme. It's the actual data we can perceive and interact with. So if absolute information is the pure, complete thought in your head, contingent information is like the clumsy text message you actually managed to type out. Di Massimo lays out this incredibly elegant formula. I equals IC plus X. It's simple, but it's huge. It shows that absolute information, that complete picture, equals the contingent information, what we can plainly see, plus this mysterious unknown variable he calls X. Basically, what you see is never the whole picture. There is always this hidden X factor just dragging along with literally every piece of information out there. And that leads us to a really crucial point, which is this resulting inequality. IC plus X minus I is greater than or equal to 0. Now, why does that matter? Because it mathematically proves that if you take what you know, add that unknown noise, and subtract the intended message, you almost never get a clean 0. You're left with either a permanent gap or a distorted surplus. The equation just refuses to balance perfectly, and that physically prevents 100% perfect transmission. When we think about dividing up this information, it really clicks. If you're on the receiving end of a message, you only ever get that contingent information piece. Because X is fundamentally unknowable, you are forever working with a missing piece of the puzzle. You can absolutely never grasp the whole thing. Moving on to Section 3, the topography of space. This is where the physical culprit is revealed. So if X is the reason we can't have perfect knowledge, we really have to ask ourselves, what exactly is this unknown variable? Where is it coming from? Well, the shocking truth is that X is not human error. It's not a typo, and it's not someone mishearing a word. It's actually a structural limitation tied directly to the physical topography of space itself. According to the conjecture, this unknown variable strictly answers to the principle of indeterminacy. Basically, the very environment a message travels through, the space itself, imposes a hard physical limit on precision. Space literally scrambles the signal. And because of this inherent spatial noise, the receiver can never, ever obtain a complete and exact understanding. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Because the universe has this built-in structural indeterminacy, whoever or whatever receives a message is forced to interpret it. Absolute certainty is totally out the window. Interpretation is mandatory. Which leads us to our final stop, Section 4, subjectivity without a mind. This is the existential twist. Now, if this uncertainty is a physical property of space, how in the world does it affect our modern technology? Because, we love to think of computers as these perfectly objective things. But let's compare human subjectivity with machine subjectivity. Humans are driven by emotion, bias, and psychology, sure. But machine subjectivity? That is driven entirely by physical constraints and their total inability to bypass spatial indeterminacy. A machine doesn't misinterpret data because it's having a rough day. It does it because it physically cannot process the X variable created by the space it exists in. Demasimo sums up this rather terrifying reality with a phrase that translates perfectly to subjective even in the absence of mind. This misleading interpretation of reality happens even when there is absolutely no consciousness involved. Both the emitting and receiving machines are totally bound by these physical, spatial limits. That means they are intrinsically subjective.
Think about the limitations here. Even if a conscious human creates a new message, the machines acting as the messengers are just unconscious victims of spatial uncertainty. They have to operate within the space topography. They literally cannot process X, and because of that, they are forced to interpret incomplete data. It makes the whole idea of a purely objective machine a complete illusion. They're always going to produce subjective, potentially misleading output.
Because every single piece of hardware, whether it's a massive server, a tiny fiber optic cable, or a satellite, physically exists inside this space topography. That irreducible X variable guarantees the data they process is inherently fragmented. They are all subjected to the principle of indeterminacy. They aren't just flawlessly passing along a perfect message. They are constantly interpreting a flawed one. So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. If mathematics proves that even mindless technology is doomed to subjectivity by the very fabric of space itself, what does that mean for all the artificial systems we rely on so heavily today? From AI to our global communication networks, if X is always lurking in the background, maybe we really need to rethink our blind trust in quote-unquote objective data. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the information around you.